Welcome everybody to Cascadia Daily News. We're in the newsroom of CDN in downtown Bellingham, and this is one of our interviews for our Citizens Agenda program. And that program, briefly, is our way of covering the November 7th, is that right? November 7th? Yes. General election with content, both news and editorial, that's shaped by our readers. We call it reader-powered election coverage. And the way we do that is we open all of our lines of communication to readers about 2-3 months ago, asking them to answer the prompt question, what do you want candidates to be talking about as they compete for votes in the next election? And they send us a lot of their ideas and thoughts. We then put those back out to readers and say, pick your 3 or 4 or 5 most important issues, which they've done. And we'll talk about those in a minute. This is our second year of doing this program, and we find that it was very successful last year. The information that we gather at this interview is twofold. One, it's our way of evaluating the candidates in person, which is very helpful for us in endorsing a candidate. Separately from that, our news operation will be covering the election using the same questions as a backdrop to their coverage. And so this interview and all of these interviews are on the record. We're not planning to write a story specifically about this interview, but if you make news, we will report it. Our first candidate here is Donnell Tanksley, who's a candidate for Whatcom County Sheriff. Welcome.
Thank you.
To CDN. It's nice to have you here and to meet you in person, finally. Been circling around you and your work for quite a while, both at Western and now as the Chief of Police in Blaine. And with us today are reporter Ralph Schwartz from CDN, our local government reporter, our publisher Cynthia Pope, and myself. My name is Ron Judd. I'm the executive editor at CDN, also the opinion page editor and sort of the head of the Citizens Agenda program. We are going to start with, you have sent us answers to our questions that came from readers, and the 3 questions that were asked of readers. I'm not going to read the whole thing here. We only have an hour. We want to get through a lot of different things, but they focused on 2 things. One, in my mind, 2 of the questions focused on bigger issues than specifically policing, but really criminal justice and how it integrates with community services and how we use our process of policing to not only keep people safe and enforce the law, but influence other social programs. So that's definitely something that's on the minds of our readers, and you answered those questions really eloquently. The other question was about the jail and whether you support a jail and how big it should be and factors that go into that. So your answers to those questions talked about several things, which I'll point out and give you a chance to extrapolate on. One, that you said that you will advocate strongly for additional state money for systems and services such as support for housing, behavioral health, and substance abuse disorder treatment, including harm reduction. You mentioned that you support, I think almost not only support, but maybe expanding the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, which is intended to keep people out of jail in some ways and get them back into society. You talked about working with Whatcom County Health and Community Services to increase those services and other things along those lines. The other question was, a reader wanted to know about training for law enforcement and peace officers of all kind and how this person felt there needs to be better training in sociology, psychology, human behavior, defensive techniques, medical assistance, those sort of things. And you said you're fully committed to that kind of work. And interesting to me was your theme in answering those questions was that you see yourself as a candidate for sheriff as your words, agent for change. And you noted that you are a person who has lived experiences about law enforcement and the community. And I'm curious to know more about that. Why do you see yourself as a head police officer for the county as an agent of change? What kind of change are you talking about, and what are your personal experiences that lead you to put that at the front of your candidacy?
Sure. So I'll start with your last question in terms of my experiences. And what led me into policing is an experience I had when I was about 19 years old, living in Ferguson, Missouri, whereby my buddies and I were off on a journey to go horseback riding. And in fact, I wrote a story in the Bellingham Herald and the Northern Light in June of 2020 about this experience. And during this experience, we were essentially racially profiled by a police department, stopped on the side of an interstate, 7 to 8 black males, all around the same age. And the reason for the stop was he said, I failed to signal in my car an hour ago. And this experience, they called us just all types of things to include racial slurs. And it was after that experience that I thought, wow, there has to be a better way to do law enforcement. There has to be a better way to treat people. Sir Robert Peel, who was one of the originators of policing, said the people are the police and the police are the people. And that really means a lot to me. So that means that the police is integrated into the community. If you police right, then your community will be integrated into the police. So that didn't happen on the side of that interstate. So a few years later, I started my law enforcement career to make change with myself to the community, and started with St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department in 1993. And later taught at the police academy for 5 years. And I told the whole story every time to the new recruits. And in fact, I tell that to my officers today, that every single encounter that the police may have with a person could change a person's life, however slight. So we want to be on the right side of things at all times. So that's what led me into policing. And then the other part of your question, if I understand it right, revolves around change.
Yes.
And change within the systems. I believe that when you talk about transparency, when you talk about police accountability, when you talk about doing the right things, that it has to come from the top. Not just sometimes, but all the time. And it has to be not only with the top law enforcement officer, but with your whole administration. And it's a culture in believing that what you're doing is the right thing to do. It's a culture of knowing your community. It's a culture of being out in the community. I will tell you that the position of sheriff and chief is not only about managing and leading the organization, but you're also leading out front in the community and building those community relationships. So within the organization, I teach fair and impartial policing. I have since about 2015, and I continue to teach it because fair and impartial policing, it's the driver of knowing that we all have biases and knowing they exist, but being cognizant of the fact that you can't let those biases drive your behavior and doing law enforcement. And lastly, I think we really need to just get back to the basics of we're peace officers, and part of being a peace officer is community caretaking of people. So that's what really drives me.
But you're talking about change, and so do you feel like there is an institutional culture of policing in this county that needs to change in that way specifically, and how specifically do you do that? Obviously, you made the very relevant point that as the leader, you set the standard, but there's a lot of space between that leadership and public pronouncements, and then what happens, like you said, alongside of a road somewhere. How do you ensure that that happens, and do you think that happens here now?
Sure. So I would say that probably 99 or more percent of law enforcement officers out there doing the right thing. But I will tell you that even within any organization, any police organization, there is a chance for something bad to happen out on the street. And part of that culture, to me, is driving the fact that it's unacceptable. You will be held accountable. We will make sure that people are treated fairly and treated with respect. I will tell you that if you interview 100 people, you might have 100 different experiences. So what I believe is making change within an organization is not something that's done overnight. It's something that's done intentional. It's something that you have to believe in. It's something that your first line supervisors have to believe in, because I could believe in it all day. But if your first line supervisors, which are generally your sergeants that are out on the street on patrol, if they don't believe in it, then I could tell you this: policy doesn't always dictate behavior. Right? So it's management, it's leadership. So I'm committed to being out there. And that's one of the reasons why I ride with my officers. It might be 15 minutes, it might be 30 minutes, but even my officers that are working night shift, sometimes I come in at 10:30 and have a 30-minute conversation just to see what's going on. So you have to be involved, you have to be engaged in order to make any change. And by the way, part of that engagement and knowing what's going on, as a police chief or a sheriff, it isn't 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. You have to be out there, and you have to be out in the community. And in the case of the sheriff's position, I would submit to you that sometimes you need to do a walk around in the jail and talk to inmates and just get a first-hand view for yourself of what's going on, not just through reports and memos.
Right. You've been a chief for a while, have you encountered, I'm guessing, but I don't know, have you encountered situations where your sub-leaders are resistant to the kind of policing, that community policing that you want to do? And if so, how do you handle those situations?
Well, I wouldn't say resistance, but I will say that sometimes, depending on the individual officer or the individual supervisor, there might be a question to, why do we need this training? I'm doing the right thing. But I believe that you have to reinforce it. And you reinforce it through your supervisors, you reinforce it through the people that are leading. But also, you have to reinforce it through the leader themselves. So I haven't seen much resistance, but I will tell you, teaching fair and impartial policing to different groups of people, sometimes, if you look out into the class, you can see a few skeptics sometimes. And then maybe after an hour or two, it's like, okay, I understand why we're doing this. So I think it's really just, you have to believe in change. And then, as we know, change isn't easy. So change is not easy, but you have to be willing to be there, stick through it, and also get the community input. I think that's important for change.
Okay, I want to shift briefly to the second subject that was raised by a lot of our readers, and this is something that is a huge issue in the community, obviously, and that's the county jail. You mentioned the jail. There seems to be, I don't know, I'm just speaking from what I see anecdotally, there seems to be broad support for the fact that the current jail is inadequate. You said the same thing. People have different levels of urgency about fixing that, and the community conversation has really shifted also to a bigger conversation than just the jail and its size and its cost, but what role that jail plays in how we treat people who are charged with crimes. And it's become something that's very much intertwined with our social approaches in general to homelessness and drug problems and many other things. And you echoed a lot of those themes in your answer to that question, which was, will you support building a new jail in Whatcom County and why? You said that we need to continue to divert people from the jail where appropriate while maintaining public safety and quality of life. I want to give you a chance here to expand on that a little bit and just talk about your philosophies about the jail, with the backdrop that some of the people in the community are arguing that the jail should be, it's too small, which is a good thing, and that's a deterrent from the justice system from putting as many people in jail. And that question interests me, and that would be something that you would deal with as a sheriff in terms of the way that you engage in community policing. So talk a little bit about that and your stance on the jail as it stands today.
Absolutely. So I do believe that we need a new jail, but I would go even further to say that we need a new justice center. And when you say jail, for most people that seems very punitive, and most people think of cages. But when I think of a justice center or a rehabilitation center, for me, the main purpose of jail, of any jail, should be rehabilitation and reintegration. And so when I look at our jail, our current jail, I look at the services, what services are provided within the jail. And not just mental health and, dental services, but how are people spending their time? And what investments do we have with the people that are inside the jail at that current time? And right now, the educational investments really isn't there. So for me, I think if the jail passes, that we have to make sure that we spend just as much money almost in the building of a jail to make sure that we have those services there. And, I'm not just talking services to teach people how to cook, things of that nature. I'm talking about literacy, financial literacy, GED. Let's do some partnerships with BTC, Bellingham Technical College. Let's do some partnerships with Whatcom Community College. Let's see if we could have some, let's say, incarceration to apprenticeship pipelines with labor unions. If a person enters a jail, we inventory all their items. If they don't have an identification card, let's figure out why. How can we help them before they leave jail to get ID? To get most services, you need an ID. So it's some things that I believe that we could do while people are incarcerated. But I also believe that we have to do what we can so people never go to jail. So then, what does that look like? So right now with the LEAD program, that's working well. I mentioned that the state legislature allocated $63 million around the state. Whatcom County LEAD program is one of the premier programs. In fact, I'm on the policy group of LEAD and have been for a few years. But are there other things that we could do? That's what I'm talking about. And being able to really take a deep look at the human side of people is what I want to do. Because not everyone wants to go to a community college. Not everyone wants to go to a technical college. What other things can we do? And for their families. So when we look at different services, are we connecting with the services that we have out here? In fact, I'll tell you, last week I did a ride-along with the Opportunity Council homeless outreach team, the HOT team. Spent 4 or 5 hours with them. Just really, and I mean, I wasn't taking any pictures. This is not for grandstanding. This is for me to get out in the community to see what's going on. And it's a lot of work that we need to do. And that's another reason why in the wintertime, I volunteer at the Civic Field overnight shelter, not as the chief of police, but as tank. I go in from 5 to 10 and, I'm warming up a cup of noodles, I'm handing out blankets, I'm doing those different things because as a law enforcement officer, I want to see how people are affected. So when you have this background and this, when you're able to see what people are going through, the whole jail issue brings a different perspective to me. And for me, it's about community caretaking, it's about helping people. It's not about taking a key and throwing it away. Because I will tell you, 95% of the people in Washington State that are incarcerated are released at some point. They're your neighbors, they're the person that's bringing your groceries up. So we want to make sure we can help people as much as we can. And I'll just say this, I've heard someone say that we want to give people a hand up and not a handout, and I really don't know what that means. But what I'll tell you is that I want to make sure that a person that's been living here 20 years, a person who just got here yesterday, has the same opportunities in Whatcom County as anyone else. So with the jail, we do need it. Apparently it hasn't been maintained. There's some chatter about why, I don't know. But what I believe is that we need a new sheriff, we need a new perspective, we need a new outlook, we need serious oversight with the funding, we need serious oversight with the building of the jail, the schematics, we need community input, and also I know there's some committees that they're talking about, right? I want to make sure that we have enough community input on those committees and not just governmental positions.
Okay.
I said a lot there.
No, that's good. The last part of the citizens agenda part before I open it up to other questions is you talked a lot about training, and our readers asked a lot about training. People feel, I seem to, in anecdotal evidence based on what we hear, a lot of people feel that not just police officers or sheriffs, but first responders of all kind need to be better trained in how to deal with people in a first encounter. You mentioned some specifics about training that you feel would be additionally beneficial, and what are those?
Sure, well, first of all, I'll tell you that I do have a training background. Earlier, I mentioned that I spent 5 years at St. Louis Police Academy, and I taught criminal investigation and juvenile law. But also my formal training, my formal education is in management and leadership. And in the Air Force, I was an education and training manager. So training means a lot. Right now, mental health training for general jurisdiction police officers in Washington State, the minimum requirement is 8 hours of training and 2 hours of training every year. I attest to you that every police officer should have the 40-hour crisis intervention certification training. We don't have that in Whatcom County. In fact, Keene County has it, Thurston County, Pierce County, Spokane, and it's through the Criminal Justice Training Commission. And we've sent officers down there for the training, but here's the problem. They come back certified and the certificate is pretty. But the services are down in the area where they trained. As Sheriff of Whatcom County, we need to have our own training here that's guided through the Criminal Justice Commission and entities here in Whatcom County, and train our folks on the resources here. In fact, 2 years ago with the Whatcom County Health Department, I suggested to them, hey, is it possible that you could make a visor card where a police officer could have all the services listed on a visor? On a card, they could just put it on top of their visor. They actually did that a few years ago. Right now, I believe they just completed a newer version in it, and having those services and those resources and training is super important. And some agencies have a behavioral health specialist or officer. I believe each police officer, each law enforcement officer should be a behavioral health specialist. I don't believe that we should count on 1, 2, 3, or 4 people to have that specialty when we could have every police officer to have those skills, because one, it teaches you how to de-escalate. It also teaches you how to interact with different people in the community that might be experiencing trauma. So yeah, I'm 100% on board to make sure, or to hopefully make sure, that we could get every person certified here in Whatcom County with the services of Whatcom County.
All right. We give a chance to my colleagues here to ask a question if you have anything.
I have a couple.
Go ahead, Ralph.
All right, I did think of a couple questions. I'm gonna look at the kind of law and order side of things, and if you think about your constituency, you have a rural constituency, and I think a lot of them would emphasize, their own feelings of personal safety and security in their community. I was going to ask you, the state legislature recently changed the pursuit law and the public drug use possession law to kind of make those a little bit stronger. Do you think that those two changes to the law went far enough, or do police need more tools in order to be able to pursue suspected criminals? Also with drug use and possession, has that change been to your satisfaction? And I'd also point to a third thing, which is retail theft seems to be, I think, a lot of people perceive as being kind of out of control. Not a lot that retailers can do to stop shoplifters. And what can the sheriff's office, particularly, I guess, in the unincorporated areas, do to counteract that trend with shoplifting? So there's a few things in there.
Yeah, and you might have to remind me of all the questions.
I can do that.
Well, first I'll start with the drug law. So I was on what they call the SURSAC committee, and that was part of HCA to address the Blake law. So I was on that committee, and we worked on those, I would say, those recommendations to the state legislature. In terms of open drug use, I don't support open drug use, but what I do support is trying to get people help where needed. Because as we know that, and I've talked to many people, that sometimes it takes 10, 12, 13 times for a person to get help. So I do think that we need some type of incentive or sanction to sometimes motivate people. But I don't believe it's a one size fits all type of situation. In terms of the pursuit law, I spent many hours talking to residents about the pursuit law. And one thing that it did, the old law, for example, if there was a burglary at someone's house and they were witnessing people taking their things, that the police couldn't apprehend that person or a car, or try to go after that person. So I do support the law as it is today. I do think that we always have to evaluate what we're doing when it comes to pursuits. Pursuits are dangerous. And we have at least in the city of Blaine and most agencies in Whatcom County, the pursuit policies are fairly stringent. Now, I will tell you that not everyone has the same pursuit policy, but they're very similar. It would be interesting at one point if we could see perhaps maybe if there was a standard state pursuit policy, for all agencies. So that might be one consideration to make sure that we're all doing it the same exact way through the entire state. And you had one more.
Well, I was thinking about retail theft or shoplifting, and I know that it's sort of a big box store, city limit kind of issue, probably most of it, but to the extent that you would have to deal with it as a county sheriff in the unincorporated areas, what are measures that you could take to, reduce that type of crime?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I will tell you, retail theft does have an effect on the businesses, has an effect on their overhead, it has an effect on insurance, and it also has an effect on shoppers as well. So, the prices might go up, you might witness something. So I know down south, like Bellevue, Renton, and some other places, they have a few police departments have a retail theft jurisdictional kind of task force, a team. I think that's one thing that we could take a look at. But I also think that meeting with those business owners and perhaps doing what we call crime prevention through environmental design, taking a look at ways that the businesses themselves could, reinforce or prevent or theft. So I think it's going to be a collaboration between law enforcement, between the businesses and the employees, because we also have to think about the employees there as well, the safety of the employees. But I think it's really important. It also affects your quality of life. So I think that we can do more, and I think we should do more. But I think as the sheriff, if we could bring some of the police chiefs together, the community, employees, and those business owners to really kind of sit down and see what we could do together. Because if we're trying to do something over here and then maybe Bellingham or Everson's doing something over there, it all might be great, but if we got together and put our minds together, maybe we could do something that's really impactful.
I have one other question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So this has to do with the immigrant community, and I've been looking into that group for some reporting I've been doing, and it seems like if possibly their number one concern, or one of their very top concerns, is local law enforcement's relationship with federal agencies, particularly Customs and Border Protection. I'm wondering how you see the relationship between the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office and, say, Customs and Border Protection or ICE. How much collaboration, cooperation, sharing of information, and again, this kind of touches on concerns about safety among our immigrant community. But how do you see that relationship between your agency should you be elected?
Sure. Well, I will tell you that right now I do have a relationship with both leaders of those organizations. And one of the first things that we talk about is the Keep Washington Working Act. So there's law in Washington, state law, with regard to what state and municipal law enforcement agencies can and cannot do with federal partners. So one of the things I talk about, in fact, I just met with one of the new leaders maybe a month ago. And when we met, I brought the law, to make sure, we're on the same page. And the leader had already read the law. So for me is explaining, hey, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. And then we follow the law. So I would tell someone from the immigrant community that we will follow the law, but also I want them to know that the law enforcement agencies I'm in charge of, that we're not going to do anything to violate them. We're not going to do anything to make them feel as if they can't call law enforcement, because I think it's important that if they need help, that they're able to call law enforcement and we respond without having the fear of, are they going to look into my, into my immigration status or any other status. And then, by the way, too, on the rare occasion when up in Blaine, when we have to call a federal partner, let's say to assist us on a call, we explain to them at the call what we can and cannot do and what they can't do. So for me, it's just reinforcing that. It hasn't been an issue, and I'm not going to violate the law.
How do you know if it's an issue, though? Like if a person, it's trying to prove a negative in a way, I know, but we've heard anecdotally over the months that there are situations. We have a heavy federal presence in this county. We're a border community. And when something happens here, we see a lot of border agents, federal people out on the streets helping with law enforcement, which is great. But there is a sense, I've heard among some people in the immigrant community, that there is a belief that if your sheriff and your sheriff's deputy show up, sometimes there might be a federal person in that group. So can you control that as the sheriff's office, or is that something that they're doing on their own? Is there a way to prevent that from happening?
So what we can control is we can't let our federal partners, we can't give our federal partners any type of identifiable information on that person, the person's name, person's date of birth, all those different type of things. And the federal partners, generally, they're not asking any of those questions either. Okay. So, but we have to make sure that each agency is trained on what they can and cannot do, so it can be controlled. And if there's a situation where the law isn't followed, then it's at that time that you would take a corrective action. But our relationship, at least for me, seems to be going well, and everyone's playing by the rules. But back to the immigrant community, as sheriff and even as chief, I've met with some nonprofit agencies that help the immigrant community, and we talk through these issues. But I do know, as the police chief and I know as sheriff, that they're probably not going to take my word, So I think it's important to bring in some people that they do trust to explain these things to them. So I'm here for them like anyone else. And I want to make sure that they're have a good life here. So, yeah.
Okay.
Whatcom County seems to me a challenging county to police, given how, I mean, we've got from the ocean all the way to the Okanagan is so broad. How does your department cover that entire county territory?
Yeah, well, so some of it is mountains, right? And a lot of water, a lot of lakes, right? You know, so the sheriff's department, they do have some officers assigned to different areas. In fact, near Diablo, that area, an officer lives out there, you know. So it is spread out. And, you know, one of the things that I want to do as sheriff is see how we could ensure that we're being represented and hearing the concerns of those people in those remote areas, to include Lummi Island, you know, for example. So I was out there just a few weeks ago and just talking to folks, trying to see what can we do better, you know, what are your needs? So I think, you know, the Sheriff's Department in general, we need to really take a look at how we're deploying our resources. We need to talk to employees and get their opinions and get their recommendations and get their suggestions. We can also do a community survey, which hadn't been done, that I recall, to see what the community needs. But also, on top of that, we need to do a staffing study to see, like, really, how many deputies do we need on patrol? How many deputies do we need in investigation? How many deputies do we need in the jail? How many support staff? Let's do a staffing study, and the study shouldn't be done by myself or anyone within government. Let's get a third-party entity to come in and take a look at that. So, you know, to answer your question, it is a vast area, but we also have to be mindful that unincorporated Whatcom County is only about 85,000 people, although the county itself is about 235,000, right? So the Sheriff's Department, although, the Sheriff's Office, I'm sorry, is responsible for unincorporated. People-wise, it's about 85,000.
But you have search and rescue, you have water rescue.
You do.
Mountain rescue. You have a lot of different hats that the department has to wear.
And that's correct. And in fact, all those entities that you just named are volunteer entities, right? That's under the umbrella of the Sheriff's Department. And I just met with Search and Rescue maybe a month ago to see what their needs are. So certainly, it is a vast area, but we really have to, I believe, just kind of bring people together to see what their needs are. And the needs are different for each volunteer entity. Yeah.
I have another question. Big picture, and this is theoretical, so I apologize for that. I know candidates hate theoretical questions, but I think this one's important, and that is, if the voters of our state, either through an initiative or a legislative mandate, approved a change in some current law that you personally don't agree with, or maybe in your view was constitutionally questionable, would you pledge to carry out that law to its fullest extent, and why or why not?
What was the first part of the question?
If there was a change in state law, either that came down through legislative mandate or an initiative.
So the answer is yes, yes, and yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, I mean, as the sheriff, we do have to follow the Washington State Constitution and the laws passed by the state legislature and the U.S. Constitution. So, as sheriff, we cannot what I would call buffet laws. You know, we can't pick and choose which ones we like and don't like, and enforce and not to enforce.
You know why I asked the question, because it's come up in the state, and some sheriffs have kind of tread that line a little in different ways, including our own sheriff here, who I don't know if his position's changed, but he has kind of, effectively said the same thing, but left open the door that people's personal liberties need to be defended. So, that's why I asked the question.
Yes, so I explained to my officers, and I have for a long time, is that the part of the judicial system which we sit in, we don't create laws, and we don't make the law, and we don't pass the laws. We do enforce and follow those laws. So, back to those biases, we all can have personal opinions on different laws and different ordinances, but that shouldn't come into play with your obligation as a sheriff, obligation as a police chief, obligation as a law enforcement officer in the state of Washington. So, yes, I will follow those laws.
Okay. I thought of something else. All right. Yeah, so I'm thinking about another hat that you wear, which would be that the Sheriff's Office includes the Division of Emergency Management, and that was very active in November 2021 when we had the big floods. So I'm wondering, do you see the Division of Emergency Management, one, as adequately prepared for the next flood should it come along, or where's the room for improvement, or what steps would you take to address something like that? And two, wildfire. That's something that I think we need to pay more attention to in Western Washington with a changing climate. So what steps would you take, or what steps are needed, do you think, for Division of Emergency Management to be prepared for a wildfire that might impinge on residences and people's, where they live? Sure.
Well, I would say that some of the changes have already, are actually already in progress. So the Division of Emergency Management actually was understaffed, but most recently they've filled some new positions. And by the way, those new positions that are being filled are not only paid for by the Sheriff's Department, but also by the 7 small cities as well. So the 7 small cities is part of the whole package. In fact, I'm part of the Whatcom Emergency Management Council, which incorporates those 7 cities. So right now that work is being done. They've hired, at least 3 to 5 people since the last floods. So I think that's really going in a good direction. I think also that we probably need to take a look at other areas. For example, as a National Guard member, I deployed down to Katrina. That was a major national disaster. And taking a look at some of those after-action reports for, now what happened here was, it was bad. And people lost property, homes, and in fact, one life. So I believe as sheriff, let's take a look at each event and let's say, okay, what went well and what didn't? And let's be honest about it. What didn't go well? And that's the only way that we can improve. We can't hide it. We have to be transparent, and we have to really take a look at all these lessons learned and put it on paper, put it out there to the public and say, hey, this is why we needed 5 more positions. This is why we need more money. Just a few weeks ago, the county council approved 2 rescue boats for the Sheriff's Department. Thank you. Or was that for him?
No.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We probably should have had those rescue boats 10 years ago. But that's okay. We have them now. So I think it's about lessons learned and being honest. I haven't seen any after-action reports from either flood. Do they exist? perhaps they do, but I haven't seen them, you know. But being able to take a look at how we could, you know, be better, and then also making sure that our partners in Canada, we connect with them as well, because this is just not a Whatcom County issue, it also crosses the border as well.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
And kind of ask about wildfire
Oh,
again.
yes.
Just because, but that was part of what I was wondering about. And Skagit County, for example, has had a community wildfire protection plan since 2009, updated in 2019. Whatcom County, the Division of Emergency Management tells me that one is coming for Whatcom County. I just wonder if that's on your radar. Do you see that as a high priority, getting that kind of beefed up plan in place for a wildfire? There are certain communities that are already underscored as being high risk right now, like Kendall and Glacier and so forth. And wondering how much thought you've given to that so far.
You know, if you stood outside yesterday for 5 minutes, I think it's on everyone's mind. The smoke was just that bad. And I lived in Kendall for a few years, and now I live in Custer, and it's wooded. And, even here in town, there's forest. So for me, it is important. And the plan that you mentioned, I haven't seen that plan either. So that would be a high priority. If you look at what happened in Hawaii, from the things I read, that people just didn't think that would happen right there, but they were prepared for other things. So in terms of emergency management, we really do need to step it up. We need to make sure that we're connecting with our federal partners as well, because a lot of the land here in Whatcom County, the forestry is federal land and some state-owned land. But we do need to come up with a plan, not just in those rural areas, but also in our suburban areas as well. So it is important. I haven't seen the draft of the plan, but it would certainly be on my agenda.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So what would be your number one agenda item if you became sheriff?
Wow, that's a hard question, just to say what's number one. But right now, I believe number one is the jail facility. I mean, that's just number one. I've been in law enforcement 30 years. I've been to a few jails. The Whatcom County Sheriff's Office jail is probably one of the worst I've seen in 30 years. I'm not quite sure how it got to that point, but here we are. So we have to make sure that if a person is incarcerated, that we have the services, that we don't have black mold, that we don't have people staying in their cells 23 hours doing nothing. We have to make sure that we're trying our best as a community to get people ready to reintegrate into the community. So it's the jail right now. We have to make sure that we have appropriate services, nursing. In fact, I served on 3 different ships in the Navy. And the medical spaces on the ships I was on was better equipped and larger than the medical unit here at our current jail.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think the jail is the number one issue. Whether it passes or not, the jail is the number one issue.
You've broached a few subjects here that touch on budgeting. You're trying to do many things with the Sheriff's Department here, and I'm just wondering what your perspective is on how much we spend on public safety and policing in Whatcom County. Are we spending enough to do all this?
I would like to get the opportunity to really dig deep into the budget of the Sheriff's Department, because it's one thing to take a look at $40+ million budget, but it's another thing to take a look at the supplements, to take a look at things that were added, to take a look at if we requested X amount of dollars for B, did we use it on B? Or was that money diverted to somewhere else? I will tell you that the majority, percentage-wise of the sheriff's office budget is based around corrections. That's the percentage-wise. It's corrections. So is that money being spent wisely? I have no doubt that it is. I mean, I do believe so. But I would really like to dig deep into that budget, and not just the current budget or last year, but take a look at it over 5-10 years to really see, have we really been good stewards of the people's money. So in terms of the budget, I would take a deep dive, not just by myself either, And then, speaking of just looking at things, I think we also have a good opportunity to have partnerships with our local university, WW. I would like to take a look at perhaps bringing in a professor or two and some graduate students, taking a look at our data. In my law enforcement experience working in urban areas and also in St. Louis and working in Portland and at WW, what I haven't seen here is really inviting academics in to take a look at your policies, take a look at the programs that you have for the community, taking a look at your budgets, taking a look at even car stops. How many car stops have the sheriff's office done in the last year? How many people were arrested? Those numbers, the demographics of the people that were stopped. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, not just with budget, but a lot of opportunity to analyze more information that has been publicly known to be analyzed. And I'm a full believer in transparency and really having people dig in to the information.
Okay. Other questions?
Not for me.
I have another question. You mentioned early on, you seem to be very much community focused, engaged in sort of meeting people where they are. That seems like a really good thing for community policing in general, but how do you get the Sheriff's Department in Whatcom County more community engagement? As you said, every encounter is with a specific officer and a specific person. What kind of things would you do to encourage that among your force?
Well, one, so in Blaine, I have a community liaison supervisor. So that supervisor is charged with reaching out to different organizations, taking a look at things that they're doing in our community. So I think that's important. I think that's something that we could do. But also it's a responsibility of every employee really to come to the table with ideas about engaging in the community. So, let's use, for example, an office specialist. That person's answering the phone, that person's also engaging with the community. So we really just want to brainstorm, give people inside the organization a chance to give suggestions. But also part of being out in the community is knowing what people want and what people expect. For example, I was out in Kendall just a couple weeks ago talking to people, and a few folks said, well, yeah, sometimes we see a sheriff's deputy, sometimes we don't, but people, they want that community engagement. But also it's important that we also have relationships with our tribal partners as well. So one idea that I have is to have a tribal liaison officer within the Sheriff's Department, specifically designated to connect with our tribal partners. So that's another idea. And the third thing is getting back to being able to do community surveys and ask people, what do you need? But also part of that, community reach is for a kind community advisory board within the Sheriff's Department, which we don't have, to really, incorporate the community into what we do. One thing I do up in Blaine, when we hire a police officer, we have what we call oral boards. So it's just the first step in a person applying to be a police officer. And then also with our promotional boards. Generally speaking, on your oral boards or promotional boards, the assessors are law enforcement officers. In Blaine, I have 1 or 2 law enforcement officers, and the remainder are someone from the school district, someone from the community. So really it's about 60% community, 40% law enforcement experience. And being able to have those community members involved in the selection process of people you hire, people you promote, is, I believe it generates greater satisfaction of involvement with your local law enforcement.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We're nearing the end of our time here, so I wanted to give you, like we give everybody, a chance to answer your own open-ended question to the general prompt of why should Cascadia Daily News endorse you for this job, and what are key differences between you and your opponent, and why do you want this job and are the best candidate?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll tell you that I have a passion for law enforcement. I have a passion for being a peace officer. I've been doing this 30 years. I'm the only candidate in this race that has led a law enforcement agency, in fact, led multiple agencies. I also believe, with my military experience, active duty Navy, spent the rest of my time in the Air National Guard, retired as a first sergeant. I've lived in Bahrain, I lived in Iceland, lived in Japan. And my formal education, I have a master's degree in management, a bachelor's degree in management and leadership, an associate's degree in criminal justice, 2 associate's degrees, an associate's degree in human resource management, and an associate's degree in education and training. And then, of course, there's professional education. So if you tie all those things together, I believe what you have with me is a person with with global experience, international experience. This county is on an international border. I've not only worked in urban areas, I've worked on college campuses, suburban college campuses and urban college campuses, and in a rural town of Blaine. So if you add all these things, I believe I'm the best candidate. And lastly, Whatcom County has not elected an internal candidate for sheriff in almost 45 years. I think that tells you that the people of Whatcom County want someone with a fresh perspective. They want someone that has new ideas. They don't want the same old. And then I'll also tell you that out of the 10 law enforcement agencies here in Whatcom County, there's only 10 that's not federal. 60% of those law enforcement agencies are led by, including the sheriff's office, someone who did not come up through the ranks of that police department. So it is not unusual for a person of leadership in law enforcement to go from one agency to the next. In fact, I'll tell you that Sheriff Elfo himself was a chief of police in Blaine for about 6 or 7 years. He spent 20 plus years as a law enforcement officer in Florida and then moved to Blaine. And 6 years later, he was sheriff. So I think right now, the city of Blaine actually has a pretty good history of,
Your city to the sheriff's office.
Yes. So that's why I believe I'm the better candidate. And I ask the people of Whatcom County on November 7th for their vote. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. This
Thank you
has
for coming.
been very educational and very helpful in our process of evaluating what's happening here. And we'll have an interesting election season coming up. And just so you all know, our coverage of the election we offer as a public service is free to the public as outside of our paywall, so I hope people tune in and read our stories about specific issues that you've raised here. And so thank you very much for coming. I also want to thank our news partners at KMRE Community Radio 88.3 who are videotaping for us here today and making this all come together for broader dissemination in October when our CDN Voters Guide will hit the street second week, I think, of October, and these taped interviews then will be released at the same time. As we like to be transparent also, and this is, to me, evidence of kind of our work product and evaluating candidates. So thanks very much for being here. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you.